Okay, so just a little bit on my research background. There's a kind of cultural reference on the left-hand side that you might recognize. It's the Beatles' Abbey Road. This is me kind of pre-Brexit, pre-coronavirus, pre-beard, and about 15 kilos lighter, walking across the same zebra crossing that the Beatles walked across a while back. Anyway, got a background in philosophy of mind, philosophy of science, and then I actually moved into film and media studies with a view initially to be a kind of a filmmaker like Steph. I wanted to actually make films, but surprisingly, it was a university, it was an academic course, so it was mainly theory. So I got interested in the theory of film, particularly cognitive film theory, and something called the paradox of fiction, the paradox of why we respond emotionally to representations of characters and events that we know for a fact do not exist and that are not physically present in front of us. So that's the paradox of fiction. And cognitive film theory, well, it's a type of film theory that makes reference to the findings of cognitive science. So that could be philosophy of mind, cognitive psychology, cognitive neuroscience, and so on. Then I somehow got my foot in the door of a cognitive psychology department in Denmark. And I don't know why they let me in, but they did. And then I started doing some actual kind of experiments on vision, emotion, culture, and so on. Okay. So what I'm going to be talking about today is really what we did in this particular paper from 2016. So I was a postdoc at Lund University in Sweden. I was living in Copenhagen, but sort of getting the bridge back and forth. And I was part of the Center for Cognitive Semiotics. And they had this Kuleshov project, but they weren't getting very far with it. So they wanted to get some kind of replication of the original study, but they were having problems doing it. So they put me on to this project. And I got a film background and I'd done a little bit of work on experiments. So it seemed to be a nice fit. So I should acknowledge my sort of co-authors at Lund University, Anna, also, and Just, who played a part in this study. So, and the kind of rationale for at the time was that, okay, the Kuleshov effect, it's very, very, very well known in film. It's quite well known in psychology, but not everybody knows about it in psychology. And as has been discussed yesterday in your presentation, the original footage is lost and the accounts of what actually happened are somewhat conflicting. And that's what Anna made an excellent case for just now. The story, the genealogy of the Kuleshov effect is complex. I'm assuming, or have been assuming, the kind of version that was originally described, I think, by Podovkin in 29, and then talked about by Hitchcock, and then translated and a few editions by Truffaut. So I was kind of taking that as the starting point. Yeah, I should say that although we the first study started at Lund University, the actual empirical work was done in Copenhagen, and this is something called CogLab. So we have a little laboratory. Cog is short for cognitive, lab is short for laboratory. We took the first three letters of each word and, like a genius, put them together. Voila, you've got CogLab. But we've got eye tracking equipment and equipment for basic kind of physiological responses like GSR, skin conductance, and heart rate, and those kinds of things. So the lab was part of the study that I'm going to be talking about today. Okay, so introducing the Kuleshov effect. Well, I probably don't need to introduce it because we've been talking about it for the last day. But what I would like to say, and the example that I've typically given is well, there are two videos available on YouTube, as Anna has already shown, and Steph showed the first version, which I think is the version with an actor who is not Mosyukin. This is the version that I've been showing to my students, at least, and I believe that this is Mosyukin, but this is not the original footage, but it kind of does what the original experiment is meant to have done, or at least the version described by Podovkin. Now, one thing that I'd like to point out about this is that Mosyukin is looking directly into the camera in this particular version. So he's potentially kind of breaking the fourth wall. If you're looking directly into the camera, you're acknowledging your audience, you're potentially breaking the fourth wall. So that's one thing to say. Another thing to say is that, well, it's depending on the account that you read. I guess I'm going by Podovkin's account, but the audience was sort of asked to evaluate the performance of Mosyukin. And they sort of inferred on the basis of these different contexts, something like hunger or thoughtfulness in the case of the bowl of soup, sadness in the case of the dead child, and desire or lust in the case of the attractive woman. But the actual details of that's how it was done are very, very vague. So, you know, did Kuleshov show each a different version to three different audiences, and how did he evaluate the audience's response? Did he rely on his own kind of response? It's not clear, and that's kind of what Anna was also talking about. Okay. So there are a couple of, you can't see the actual top of my slide there. Maybe is there a way of shifting the projector? There are a couple of ways of understanding this type of sequence that you've just seen. So you've got a neutral phase followed by an emotional context, followed by a neutral phase. And the first interpretation is that this is an example of montage editing, where the relationship between the shots is not necessarily spatial, and it might be cognitive. So it could be the case that the actor Mosyukin was meant to be thinking about or imagining the bowl of soup, a bowl of soup that was not physically present in his line of sight. But I think I'm going to have to rewrite this slide, because following that quote from Podovkin from 1929 that Anna just showed, it seems that Mosyukin was meant to be actually looking at the bowl of soup. But anyway, the original version was proposed as a type of montage. But there's a second interpretation, and an interpretation that's much more likely for a contemporary audience, and that is that it's not montage editing, it's actually continuity editing. So it's an example of, and continuity editing is the type of editing that you would find in a kind of classic Hollywood movie. It's the type of editing that kind of follows natural patterns of attention. And there are two sort of classic examples of continuity editing, which are point of view editing and eyeline match editing. And in continuity editing, the relationship between the shots is definitely spatial, and it's also perceptual. So Mosyukin is looking at a bowl of soup that is in front of him, and then he's feeling hungry, and you're somehow kind of inferring that. So we've got a philosopher of film, Noel Carroll, who writes about point of view editing, and he says that, sorry, I'll move, this is also in the way, that the point of view structure duplicates the natural perceptual tendency to follow the gaze of an intentional agent to a target object. Pierre Pearson describes the point of view structure. Well, he says that it duplicates dielectric gaze behavior. So the idea is that, if I look up at the ceiling and I keep looking and I keep looking and I keep looking, you're going to be inclined to follow the direction of my gaze. Why? Because it gives you information potentially about what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, also potentially about an object that is also in your environment and could be of significance to you. So there's lots of very, very good reasons why we follow the direction of another person's gaze. And it's happening all the time. We're not aware of it, but we're very, very constantly sort of sensitive to where other people are looking, and sort of and it's a way of kind of basic mind reading. So we see it in humans, we see it in young humans, babies. We see it maybe in primates, and we also see it in, we might be able to see it in animals like dogs. Anyway. Okay, so I've got a section on how to understand a Kuleshov type sequence and how a modern contemporary audience would understand a Kuleshov type sequence. So here we have point of view and eyeline match editing. And this is drawing again on the work of Noel Carroll, philosopher of film. So what Carroll says is that point of view editing duplicates the natural perceptual tendency to follow the gaze of an intentional agent to a target object, while eyeline match editing duplicates the natural perceptual tendency to follow the gaze of a first intentional agent to a second. So we can see point of view editing. The classic example is Hitchcock's Rear Window, James Stewart, broken leg, nothing to do but sit in his apartment all day long, looking out the window. James Stewart, we see his face, then we cut to what James Stewart is looking at. It might be an attractive woman dancing in the apartment opposite or something else. And then we cut back to James Stewart's face and we see his reaction. That's point of view editing, and that's the kind of basic kind of sandwich triadic structure of glance, followed by object, followed by glance. And then we've got eyeline match editing, which is kind of a subcategory of point of view editing. Basically, it's when one intentional agent is looking at another intentional agent, and then the second intentional agent looks back. So you've got two eye lines kind of connecting the two different shots. Classic example from another Hitchcock film is a conversation between Cary Grant and Eva Marisante in North by Northwest. They've just met each other, but already there's some kind of chemistry going on between them. What is it that attaches those two shots? Well, Cary Grant is looking off screen right, and Eva Marisante is looking off screen left, and it's the eye line that joins those two shots together. So the basic argument here is that point of view editing and eyeline match editing is kind of duplicating this very natural perceptual behavior that we have, and replacing the kind of corresponding head movement with an edit works because it is the endpoints of the activity and not the space between that command our attention. And then I've just added a little bit of terminology at the bottom there: glance shot, point glance shot, object shot, point object. Okay, and this is just an illustration of how what the real world analog of point of view editing would be, and what the real world analog of eyeline match editing would be. And the idea is that you replace the observer, this kind of third party witness, with a camera. And then you replace the head movement with a straight cut or edit. Okay, so this is point of view and eyeline match editing. Now, there's a connection here with the mind reading debate that Steph was talking about yesterday. So how do we make sense of other people's minds, what they are thinking, what they are feeling. There are two sort of basic schools out there. There's theory, or folk psychology, as Steph mentioned yesterday. And then there's simulation theory. And I'm actually going to take just an example from this time from theory. We talked about simulation theory yesterday, but take an example from theory. So we've got one example is Baron Cohen's work on mind blindness. He talks about this theory of mind module, and he talks about these kind of different mechanisms. And there's an intentionality detector that can be triggered by very, very basic kind of schematic stimuli. This is a film by Heider and Zimmer from 1944. You've got geometrical shapes moving around, and just those movements are enough to trigger the sort of attribution of intentions. So that's the intentionality detector, but there are a couple of other mechanisms that are of interest. There's the eye direction detector, EDD for short, and there's the shared attention mechanism, or SAM for short. So let's just show you an example of eye direction detection and also SAM, shared attention. So what are attentional agents A1 and A2 thinking and feeling in this particular example, would you say? Yeah. Yeah, but in terms of mental states, how would you describe what's going on? Yes. Looking at A1. Okay. The same thing. Okay. So what we could say is that agent A1 is looking at the object, and maybe A1 wants that object. And then A2 recognizes that A1 wants that object. And so we can see this kind of instantaneously. We don't sort of have to cognitively do much work. And it's on the basis of direction of gaze, eye direction. And here's another example of dialectic gaze behavior that I think is quite interesting. Apparently, there is an evolutionary advantage to us having larger eye whites. The sclera, the white part of the eye, is much larger in the case of humans than, for example, dogs. And why is this? Because it allows us to detect where other people are looking. And that's one of the arguments for why we potentially have this larger white in the eye. And you can contrast the human there with the primate in the middle and the dog at the top. But apparently dogs can follow the direction of their owner's gaze, but they can't follow the direction of another dog's gaze. But I'm not sure if that's true or not. If anybody has pets, and maybe we can talk about that later about animal cognition. Anyway, these are all arguments for the importance of dialectic gaze behavior. And then I've got a couple of slides on how we should understand facial expression and emotion. So one view, and this is the view that I described yesterday in the talk by Joanna, is this kind of neurocultural model of facial expressions. It goes back to Darwin, but the key kind of figure is Paul Ekman. And what his model claims basically that the neurodimensional model stipulates that we feel some emotion and then we express it via the muscles of our face. So a facial expression is a readout of some kind of primary or basic emotion. Now there's a kind of cultural element as well that's kind of added on. And that is this idea that some expressions can be overridden by social display rules. So We've got facial expressions for the primary basic emotions. What are they? Fear, anger, disgust, sadness, happiness. Some people add surprise, some people add interest, some people add contempt to that list. And these expressions are meant to occur universally across cultures, but they can be overridden and inhibited somewhat by cultural display rules. So, for example, there are differences between American participants in some studies and Japanese participants. So this is one view of facial expressions and emotion. But there's another view out there. And this is the behavioral ecology view of facial expressions. And this has been proposed by Alan Fridland, who I spoke to when I was in Santa Barbara on my PhD. Now, Fridland was originally a pupil of Ekman, so he comes from the Ekman camp. But he kind of went away from Ekman's original idea. And what Fridland does is he stresses the importance of situational context and also kind of intentional communication. So if we take the two examples here, the top example is the kind of classic shower scene, the notorious shower scene, Hitchcock's Psycho, and we've got Janet Leigh displaying a face, so meant to be a kind of classic facial expression of fear. She's screaming, she looks terrified with good reason because there's somebody attacking her with a big knife. So good reason to look afraid. But let's take the second example. If you look at the face itself, if you look at the facial action units, it looks pretty similar to the example at the top. And yet the emotion might be completely different. And this is the kind of example that Joanna was showing yesterday, and the importance of situational context. Now, some people will interpret that as anger or frustration because this particular athlete lost the race. I don't think that's actually the case. I think that this is an expression of triumph, joy, because that person actually won the race. But very different emotions, but the face itself kind of looks the same. But it is expressing something. It's expressing some extreme emotion. Maybe we can agree on that. But whether it's positive, whether it's negative, whether it's joy, disappointment, or whatever, we need the context for that. So that's another way of understanding what the role of the face, but it's about bringing context into the picture. Okay. So if we get back to kind of the Kuleshov effect, a strong version of the Kuleshov effect would say that a character's face is emotionally amorphous. That is, the viewer's interpretation of a character's emotional state is shaped entirely by the situational context. So you've got a neutral face, and then different contexts will drive your interpretation of that neutral face. Carol is skeptical about the strong version, and I'm skeptical about the strong version as well. I think facial expressions are normally suggesting at least something, but context is also important because that provides the precise meaning. And this is what basically Carol argues. So Carol argues that the close-up of a character's face normally functions to suggest some sort of emotional state. The glance shot in the point of view structure, so the first shot of the face, establishes some kind of emotional range. It acts as a kind of range finder, while the object shot provides an emotional focus. So it's a kind of focuser. So this is the weak version of the Kuleshov effect, and this is the version that I'm going to kind of argue for. When you say, does the Kuleshov really exist? Well, I'd say yes, but it's a weaker version, not the stronger version. And what we can see on the left-hand side, we've got the neutral face at the very top. We've got Ekman's kind of neurocultural model at the bottom. And then we've got the kind of behavioral ecology view somewhere in the middle. And I think the weaker version of the Kuleshov effect is operating somewhere in the middle. And Andre, you really like mediation, and that's what I'm going to be arguing for today. So, and then just a few. Where did I start? What time did I start? Okay. I'll just say a few words about emotion as well. This is my way of understanding emotion. This is my way of kind of teaching emotion. Here we've got three actually film examples. The simplest type of emotional situation, really, where a character is confronted by an object of threat, be it a bear in the first case, a snake in the second case, or a very, very nasty shark who will appear now in the final case. So the middle one is Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's one of my favorite films of all time. And the bottom one is Jaws. That's also one of my favorite films of all time. I can't remember actually what where the top version came, but it's starring Anthony Hopkins. Anyway, here we've got an emotional situation, a fear situation. And what we can say is that in all of these cases, there is object orientation. So if you were actually in this type of situation yourself, you would orient or attend to the object of threat in the environment, be it the bear, the snake, or the shark. And we could say that the object of threat affords danger. There's goal orientation. So we have some kind of goal of survival or self-preservation. And then there's action orientation. So we respond in a way that is adaptive. Fight, flight, or freeze. I would not recommend, by the way, fighting a bear. Just make a very loud noise, and I think that's probably safe. Anyway, but there are different kind of adaptive responses. Now, you can also talk about different kind of stages. And so there's the emotional stimulus that's presented, be it the bear, the snake, or the shark. We can also talk about subtler kind of emotional cues, and we can also talk about situational meaning. So the actual meaning of a situation. There's the appraisal stage, where there's some kind of appraisal of what's of the emotional stimulus. We can talk about the different neurobiological systems involved. We can talk about associative networks, and we can talk about cognitive appraisals. And then there's the response stage, finally. So we could talk about kind of internal physiology. So in the case of fear, you will, the heart will increase, the heart rate will increase, you'll breathe more quickly, more deeply, and adrenaline will be released. So these are all examples of kind of internal physiological responses. And then you've got behavioral responses, which might be running away, fighting, and so on. And the behavioral part also includes the facial expression, your facial expression of fear. And then there are various kind of subjective phenomenological components as well. So this is just a slide on how I understand emotion. And then we've got two different approaches to emotion, one called the categorical approach, which basically understands emotion in terms of different kind of categories. And then we've got our kind of classic list of primary or basic emotions on the left-hand side: fear, anger, disgust, sadness, and happiness, and surprise as well. And the idea being that those emotions occur universally across cultures. They're associated with specific physiological responses, specific facial expressions, and so on. And then we've got our list of secondary and more complex emotions. And this is just a few examples, but these emotions are meant to be, well, more complex. Cognitively speaking, they involve newer parts of the brain, the neocortex. and then also meant to be more kind of culturally specific, culturally variable as well. So this is the categorical approach. The reason I'm saying this will become clearer in a short time. And then there's the dimensional approach. So we can also evaluate any type of emotional situation in terms of these two kind of basic dimensions of valence, whether something's good, bad, positive, negative, pleasant, or unpleasant, and also in terms of arousal or intensity. So low arousal versus high intensity. So this is the dimensional approach. Now, which approach is right? Well, again, we can take some kind of middle ground, and we can say that aspects of both are correct. Okay, let me try and push on for the sake of time. So previous attempts at replication. So when I was brought on board at Lund University to do this project, we could only find really 2 actual attempts at replication in the literature. One is by Prince and Hensley. So this is Stephen Prince, who's very prolific writer on film, professor, who sadly died quite recently. But he did, or attempted to get this kind of replication. So here you can see the details. Close-up of an actor's emotionally neutral face, 3 different contexts, positive, negative, and one for hunger, kind of inspired by the original kind of myth of the Kuleshov experiment. And then they made these different sequences. And you can see that Prince used this kind of triadic sandwich structure. So he puts the face at the beginning and at the end, and the context in the middle. And each shot was shown for 7 seconds, which to me sounds actually a very, very long time. Now, his participants were undergraduate students, communications. They probably, I'm not sure if they'd heard about the Kuleshov effect or not. I'm assuming that he probably controlled for that. Now, the procedure, he took a categorical perspective. So he asked the participants to choose emotions from a list: happiness, sadness, fear, anger, disgust, surprise, hunger, no emotion, and other. And each participant only saw one sequence. The main problem of this study is that it didn't find anything. It didn't find a Kuleshov effect. So the majority of participants chose the no emotion option, and the remainder, who actually did pick an emotion, tended to choose the wrong one. So Prince and Hensley didn't get a replication. And I spoke to Stephen Prince himself, and I asked him, can you send me your original stimuli? And he'd lost his original stimuli as well. So not only has Kuleshov Podovkin lost the original footage, but Stephen Prince himself lost the original footage. Okay, so this is the first attempt at replication, doesn't find a result, and the footage is lost. Now, the second attempt was in the field of neuroscience. And what I'd just like to point out here is that they took a dimensional perspective. So they were asking people to judge things like valence and arousal. And they were also sitting people in a scanner and doing fMRI. They did find some effects, some bold responses in parts of the brain associated with emotion, like the amygdala. But there are various problems with this study. And we can argue that what they presented does not really look like the original Kuleshov effect, the original Kuleshov study. And significantly, there is a big interval between the nasty dog that you can see here and then the face that's presented. And that's to do with the kind of fMRI design, that you have to have this kind of interval. So basically, in order to put this thing into the brain scanner, they had to remove the cut, the edit itself, and insert this kind of blank space between the 2 shots. So again, there are various problems with this version of the study. So at the time of writing, there were no replications out there that we could really find. Okay, so let me get on to what we actually did, and I'll try and move a little bit quicker. So I inherited this project, and we had limited time, we had limited resources. We needed to get the thing done, and we did the best that we could with the time and resources that we had. And I think, you know, we did a reasonable job, and I think we wrote a reasonable paper. I think the paper is stronger as a theoretical piece than as an empirical study. Actually, when I look back, I think there were some things we did wrong. We should have done differently. And that's one of the reasons maybe why we should upload the report now. Anyway, there are various kind of practical issues, pragmatic issues that we had to consider. So, okay, faces. How do we get the faces? Do we take sequences from existing films? Well, that's problematic because you might recognize the actor, etc. Loads of problems. Do we recruit actors? Well, we could do that. Maybe we do that in the future if we have some kind of joint project. But we just didn't have the resources to do that. Should we use existing picture sets? Well, we decided that we would use an existing picture set. And then there were questions about, well, the position of the head. Should the person be looking into the camera? Should they be looking off camera, and so on? Facial cues, lighting, background, all the rest of it. Context, which emotions should be tested, and timings. You know, how long should we show these different shots for? Because what Prince and Hensley did, showing something for 7 seconds, that's a long time by contemporary Hollywood standards. These are the 8 conditions that Pearson describes. This is the likelihood for the viewer to make a point of view inference will be increased if one or more of the following 8 conditions are met. And you mentioned these yesterday. And what we tried to do is we tried to take the first 4, but not the second 4. So the gazer should not look directly into the camera, because if they do, they'll be breaking the 4th wall. So we tried to obey that rule. The object shot should be presented from the optical perspective of either the gazer, in the case of a true point of view, or a third-party observer in the case of an eye-line match. We tried to follow that rule. The glance shot and the object shot should be followed by another glance shot. So you should have this kind of triadic sandwich structure where the context is the meat in the sandwich and the faces are bread, to use a metaphor that I think you'll appreciate. And maybe we can recreate that metaphor in the dinner tonight. Kuleshov sandwich. The environment of the glance shot should match the environment of the object shot. So the background, the lighting, those kinds of things should be consistent. So we tried to follow the first 4. We couldn't follow the final 4. We get back to that. But and this is what you suggested yesterday. For example, number 6, the gazer shows some form of reaction in the second glance shot. Well, ideally, we would have added some kind of reaction, but we didn't know how to do it. You know, should we use an actor, or should we show a slightly different facial expression at the end, or should we get a morph between a neutral face? And we didn't quite know how to do it. So we think, okay, we'll just try to get a replication of the original Kuleshov study, and then we'll see what happens. Okay. And this is just to say that this is a great paper by Cutting, Changes in Hollywood Film over 75 years. And Cutting measures various different parameters. One of them is shot length, average shot length. And you can see the graph, top left, that films have systematically become quicker and faster. So the average shot length is now around the kind of 3 to 4 second, at 3 to 4 seconds. Now, a TV commercial, on the other hand, like a car commercial, will have a very, very fast editing speed. So the editing speed might be 1 cut every second or every half second. But the kind of classic Hollywood standard is around the kind of 3 to 4 second. So that's what we kind of used as a guideline, because as I said, 7 seconds just seemed too long. So, okay, so stimulus materials and participation and participants. How am I doing for time? Can you be honest? Okay. Okay. Well, I can go through the rest of it very, very quickly. And it's all visual, and it's going to be very emotional and a little bit arousing as well. So a word of caution there. Okay. So we compromised. We didn't employ actors, but what we did find was a great picture set from Sweden. So this is the Karolinska directed emotional faces. One of the advantages of this data set is that you've got the 6 kind of classic basic emotions described by Ekman, plus neutral. And you've also got different head positions. So you've got people looking into the camera, but also 3/4 profile and side profile as well. So what I tried to do was find the most, these are all neutral facial expressions. I picked 12 people who didn't have extreme hairstyles, extreme makeup or earrings or anything like this. And you can see that I've chosen the 3/4 profile. So they're not looking directly into the camera, they're looking kind of slightly off, and converted everything into grayscale. So trying to sort of control for things like backgrounds and lighting and everything, converted everything to standard aspect ratio, removed moles and blemishes from the faces. And these are the 12 female neutral faces that we came up with. And then these are 12 average looking Swedish guys trying to be neutral. The same thing for the men. And then what we did is we added a little kind of zoom in, which is, I think it's called the Ken Burns effect. And you see it in documentaries when they're trying to make old black and white photographs look a little bit more dynamic. How do you do it? Where you add a kind of slow zoom. So we added a slow zoom as well. And then here are our object shots. And I'll just show them. So here are our different happiness contexts. So we've got a very cute baby that was pretty successful as a stimulus. We've got a child playing with a doll. That's kind of homage to Kuleshov's kind of original or so-called original study. The bottom 2 were not so successful. I thought a cute dog, a cute puppy, and a cute kitten, I thought they'd be nice, but people actually interpreted them as being a little bit sad or a little bit melancholy. So those weren't entirely successful. Here are our sad stimuli. So we take a coffin, a graveyard, and so on. Because these are static objects, we took just a photograph, and then we added the Ken Burns zoom to these particular examples. Here, hunger. So this is homage again to Kuleshov, to Podovkin. Anna can tell me who it's a homage to, but to at least one of those guys. So the bowl of soup. And then the idea was to pick something that was food, but that wasn't too exciting. So we chose the kind of carbohydrate accompaniment to a main meal. So bread, rice. What I realized afterwards is that I should have cooked the potatoes. Didn't cook the potatoes. So this is, you live and learn. If I'd sliced the potatoes, fried them with a little bit of garlic and onion, they would have looked a lot more appetizing. Anyway, here are fear stimuli. Snakes, pretty successful. There's a lot of literature out there about fear of snakes, and we can have, snake phobia for very, very good reason. There's also a lot of good literature out there about spiders, so fear of spiders and phobias of spiders. And our fear of these objects is meant to be kind of biologically prepared, or we're meant to have some kind of hardwired capacity to fear a snake or to fear a spider. And you realize this with little kids. I don't know if you've ever seen a little baby. They're only about this big when they come out. Very, very difficult to get them to be afraid of things like sticking metal objects into electric sockets, because there's no evolutionary precursor for that being dangerous, but pretty easy to get them to be afraid of snakes and spiders because there is some kind of evolutionary history there. Anyway, but the snake and the spider, successful. Lion and tiger, not so successful because people kind of interpreted them as being, okay, you know, maybe this is a zoo, maybe it's a safari. What I'm feeling here is not fear, maybe it's admiration, or maybe the lion is proud or something else, okay? So these are our fear stimuli. Now, what I'm going to show you in the next slide are the desire stimuli. Anybody going to be offended by half nudity? Because you're the moral guide. You're my moral, spiritual guidance while I'm in Romania. Okay. So, so the next slide is very difficult to find, and this searching for these stimuli took me to all kinds of weird and wonderful parts of the internet. It's very, very difficult to find images of half-naked people that are not artistic. They're either very artistic or they're very pornographic. So it's very, very difficult to find half-naked people in ordinary environments. So, so this is what I came up with. So here we've got our images. I won't show them too long for fear of offending anybody, but just to say that for the first image, Desire One Woman, she did actually have a copyright mark on part of her anatomy, you know, print copyright mark. And I thought, you know, I can either try to remove this pixel by pixel, or I can ask Lund University to purchase the photograph using my credit card. So I used the latter option, although, you know, I could have done it pixel by pixel, but Lund University actually purchased the first photograph of the woman. And then lots of really strange stuff started happening to my computer and to my credit card afterwards as well. But anyway, that's another story that we won't go into. Anyway, all of these people here, we can think of them all as philosophers or film students. They've been at a conference for Kuleshov. They've been intellectually stimulated, but they're really, really tired. And it's also really, really hot. So they're not wearing many clothes. So anyway, those are our desire stimuli. Okay. And then we had a null condition where it was just a simple countdown from 3, 2, 1, and so on. And it was important to have that. Anyway, so we had, well, won't go into the details, but we had, I mean, there are a huge number of possible combinations, a way of combining all of these different things. But we had 6 different participant groups. So 6 groups, 6 participants. Yeah, 36 participants in total, divided completely equally according to gender, all from Copenhagen Business School and so on and so forth. So these are all details that you can read about in the paper. None of the participants had heard of either the Soviet filmmaker Lev Kuleshov or the Kuleshov effect. And this is what the procedure looked like. There was an instruction to begin with. I'll move on for the sake of time. And this is what the trial procedure looked like. So a kind of fixation cross in the center of the screen to begin with, because we were also recording their eyes and where they were looking. So we wanted to be sure that they were looking in the same part of the screen to begin with. And then the face on the screen for 3 seconds, followed by the object for 3 seconds, followed by the face again, and then 3 different questions. So this is what it looks like. The woman looks off screen, right, very nice baby, looking back towards the woman. And this is actually, well, it's a point of view shot, but it's also an eye line because the eye lines are consistent. A different group of participants will see exactly the same woman, exactly the same face, but looking at a different stimulus, a graveyard, and then back to the woman. This is a case of pure point of view because there's no object returning the gaze. And then you've got these different questions. So remember, Prince and Hensley, they did the categorical approach to emotions. Mobs et al. In that neuroscience study, they did the dimensional approach. We tried to combine both. So we got information about the dimension. How would you rate the valence of the person's emotion on a scale from -4 to +4, negative to positive? How aroused does the person appear to be In retrospect, the word arousal was not the best word to use because arousal has a kind of sexual connotation, and that's not really what we were after. We're really talking about the intensity of the emotion. Again, you live and learn. Cook potatoes and don't use the word arousal. 2 take-home lessons from this particular study. And then this is the categorical approach. So we asked them which type of emotion. And then we gave them a list of, well, the classic 6 emotions described by Ekman, and then we also put hunger on the list, we put desire on the list, and we had an other category as well. And we were recording their eye movements while they were doing this. And here's just an example of what the eye tracking data kind of looks like. What I find different, this is some reading, and what you see, what I think is actually the clip is still. Sorry, there's some loading issue. Okay. What I just wanted to show you here is when they get to terms like valence and intensity, they start looking a lot longer because they haven't come across those terms before. So this is an idea of what the kind of thing that you can get out of the eye tracker. You can almost see people thinking through where they're looking, and you know, if they stumble on a word that they haven't come across, they dwell, they look longer at that particular word. Anyway, that's just an example of the eye tracking data. The video is loading very, very slowly, so let me continue. So the results. So what we can see on the left-hand side is a kind of 2-dimensional emotional space. We've got valence on the, let me see, how do I do it? Valence on the vertical, is that right? Getting a bit tired, and arousal on the, anyway. So ideally, if the Kuleshov effect works, then if somebody sees a fearful face, then their answer should be in the top left quadrant because it's low valence but high in intensity. Desire, positive valence, because desire is normally good, also quite high intensity. Sadness, negative valence, but maybe not so intense. Happiness, high valence, and I've put high intensity as well, but I'm not sure that's correct. Anyway, so those are the predictions on the left-hand side. What we actually found is on the right in terms of valence and arousal. And we found significant results for the sadness condition and also for the desire condition. So those sexy images seem to work in at least one way. And the sad images also seem to work as well, in terms of valence and in terms of arousal. Now, in terms of categories as well, we found some kind of effect, at least in the sense that people chose the right category that we'd asked them to. I mean, we kind of forced them to make a decision. But I think what's interesting is that in the null condition, for example, where we're not showing any context, a neutral face on its own without any context will be interpreted as a little bit sad. So if you add a context like a graveyard, then you kind of bolster that reaction as well. So I think, the Kuleshov effect for some emotions, for like sadness, I think you can make a good argument for it working. So I think that's kind of interesting, that a neutral face on its own, without any context, is actually not interpreted as neutral. It's interpreted as being a little bit sad. And if you add something else, a sad context as well, then you get an even kind of stronger result. Now, just to say that the reason that we recorded the eyes and the eye tracking, well, partly we wanted to use this fancy bit of equipment that we'd used when we got in the lab that cost about 20,000 or 30,000 euros, whatever. If you spend that amount of money, then you have to use your equipment and justify it doing cutting edge academic research. There's another word of wisdom. But we did have a hypothesis So the idea is that different emotions have different diagnostic regions. And I think Joanna mentioned this yesterday in her lecture. So in the case of happiness, for example, the diagnostic region is the mouth. You know, it's the mouth that's giving most information about happiness. It's not giving all the information because, you know, the fake smile is fake smile because it doesn't activate the eyes. So there's no, the eyes are dead, and you know all of that. But anyway, the key region is the mouth. So it's the lower part of the face in the case of happiness. Now, in the case of fear, on the other hand, it's the eyes. It's the eyes opening wide, sort of letting a lot of light in. So it's the eyes that are the diagnostic region in the case of happiness, in the case of fear, sorry. So the hypothesis is this. We see the neutral woman looking off screen right, and then she sees a cute baby. And what we're looking for in the return shot is evidence of happiness. How do we search for evidence of happiness? Well, we look at the mouth and we see if there's a little bit of, you know, something going on with the mouth. Now, in the case of fear, on the other hand, horrible snake, nasty snake, then we're going to be looking more at the eyes, for the widening of the eyes and so on. Now, as with many of these studies, results went in kind of the anticipated direction, but they were not significant. They were going in the anticipated direction for the snake and the spider and the little baby and the girl playing with the toy, but they were not significant. So we couldn't make any kind of story about it. But we did get a significant result for hunger, which we were not anticipating. So even though I didn't cook those potatoes, people actually looked at the mouth more in the return shot, just in the case of hunger. So we got a significant result for hunger, but we weren't anticipating it. We didn't have any hypothesis about it. So anyway. Okay, so I know I'm going to wrap up in 2 minutes. So what I'm really kind of been, I think, making an argument for is this kind of weaker version of the Kuleshov effect. The face is suggesting something, but not everything, and that we need the context to kind of pinpoint the meaning. And I think this is also how Hitchcock, well, this is what Noel Carroll was saying, and this is how Hitchcock is basically understood the effect as well. And well, this is an example from the Truffaut interview. And you actually, the bottom quote, the quote at the bottom is basically what Steph was showing yesterday. Now in the study that I've just been talking about, we actually tagged on a clip from Rear Window as the final stimulus. So I've actually got some data about Rear Window that, to be honest, I haven't actually looked at. But this is, and what I realized when looking at Rear Window is it's very difficult to find James Stewart's face looking neutral, because it's always expressing something. It's always expressing something. Now, somebody out there on YouTube actually compiled all of the shots of James Stewart's face and uploaded it onto YouTube. This person probably had too much time on their hands, but I'm very grateful that they did this because it meant I didn't have to do it. But if you look at Stewart's face, I think the videos, yeah, you look at Stewart's face here. Well, firstly, we're following the direction of gaze, so we know which apartment he's looking at. But his face is always suggesting something. So this is the shot that we used from Stewart. We took a neutral shot, and then we picked 4 different contexts from the movie. And we had the attractive woman dancing. We had the married couple embracing. We had a cute dog being loaded in a basket. And then we had a scene that's very key to the narrative. This is Grace Kelly, the female lead, being attacked by the main antagonist of the film. And then we basically asked people exactly the same questions. So we have some information about actually the Rear Window. And then I've got some visualizations of the eye tracking data. I won't show you that now, also because of technical video issues and time. issues as well. Time waits for no man, especially not me. So I won't show you that. But what I kind of think is that, okay, here's Al Pacino, and he's looking kind of moody. And this is a kind of moody part of this particular film. But actually, you know, he doesn't actually have to do that much. You know, given the context and the music and everything else, he just has to be Al Pacino. And he's really good at being Al Pacino, you know. So, and I think that this is kind of the weaker version that I think we found, that if you put, you know, Pacino looking in this particular context, with the narrative, with the music and everything else, he doesn't have to do that much facially. The context and everything else will kind of do the work for him. So I'm arguing again for a kind of weaker version. Okay. And then these are some things to consider for future studies. So if we do sort of work together in the future, reduce demand characteristics, include fillers, filler stimuli to sort of disguise the true purpose of the experiment, include morphs, faces that are 75% neutral, 25% sad, etc. Maybe recruit actors. There are various ways we can develop this. And yeah, ideally we should start to tackle some of the additional rules in Pearson's list. Just want to acknowledge these other two papers. This is a paper co-authored with Marta Calvi at the University of Parma. This was a kind of behavioral study on the Kuleshov effect. And then here is another study with Marta as the first author and Anna as one of the co-authors. So this is the first meeting of minds, happened in this academic paper. Now we meet today. And there's been an attempt to add a kind of auditory kind of Kuleshov effect as well. I think I thank you very much for your attention, and for I apologize if I was going off top of that. Okay. Yeah, well, we can take yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, just, and yeah. I mean, the wording could be better. This was the best wording that we could come up with at the time. We had a fairly comprehensive. I mean, the instruction itself was fairly comprehensive. So the participant had a chance to go through this instruction, and then also if they had any questions, they could ask me, because I was there operating the eye tracker. So we made it clear to them what valence meant and what arousal meant, and so they knew that before they started the experiment. We also did a practice trial, I think, at the beginning of the experiment, so they had some practice as well. And then, I mean, for the scale, the actual scale itself, I mean, yes, we're using the term valence here, but the scale is actually labeled. So it's labeled from negative to positive. We've got neutral in the middle. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I take your point about it was difficult to find the right wording, and we were worried about that. We tried to get around it by a fairly comprehensive instruction, also verbal interaction with the experimenter at the beginning, and so on. So I'm not quite sure how I would rephrase this one. I definitely think the word aroused, we should have used a different word here. But you can see that the scale is from calm to excited. So that gives you an idea of what the scale is about. Yeah, exactly. The scales work better, than the questions themselves. I think that's right. But yeah, point well taken. So yeah, that's another thing that potentially could be improved in follow-up studies. Yeah. Yeah. But when you have a little bit neutral or the image of absolute then you simplify some situation. Because some people might recognize certain visual cues that are neutral. People understand. People and they also might yeah. I think so. I mean, I think we were trying to force them into making some kind of interpretation. I mean, for this list, for example, we had a debate with the fourth author, who was the statistician for the, and I said, should we put neutral in the list, for example? And he said, no, we should force them to make some kind of response. But there is an other at the very end. And some people, so that's how I found that the lion and the tiger were not that successful, because people were using the other one for the lion and the tiger. And they were putting things like admiration, pride. But yeah, I mean, we considered the list, should we force people to choose certain options or, so in the end we went, and we were kind of inspired by the previous studies and what the previous studies had done, what Prince and Hensley had done. So we tried to kind of replicate a little bit of that as well here. So, but yeah, I mean, these are, again, something that could be revised. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there is an open text thing. Is the end option? So that they did have an open text version. Yes, that's option 9 on the list. And that you can see there's a little text box underneath, so they could write things there. Yeah. Okay. Good.
First of all, it was a very immersive presentation. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah.
Second, I think it was brilliant with the equipment for engagement detection. And I was astonished that they have 30,000 euros to invest in that equipment. But
well, they don't have that anymore.
Not 1,000 to invest in an actor.
Oh, well, no, the equipment was bought already for a separate for a separate thing.
For no reason.
And actually,
You invented a reason for it.
Actually, it wasn't owned by Lund University either. It was owned by CBS. So anyway.
I think this is the main point. Why? Because I think our emotional reaction and others' emotion, our emotional appreciation of other emotions are involved. And when you start to talk about emotions, see, there is another kind of process involved, kind of judgment. And I'm not into that. I'm not interested in seeing if you understood the emotion. I'm interested in seeing if you felt it, you detected it. And I think this part of the eye gazing was very, very well. I think it should be, we should continue using it if we will make another study. First question is like this. Have you used the eye detection for both pictures in the sequence, right?
Yes.
So first one,
Yeah.
Then contact, then the second one, which was same picture.
Yeah.
Have you analyzed if there is any shift and difference in eye gazing to the different parts of the faces? As you said, it was again brilliant to follow the diagnostic areas from the face, right? But if there is an emotion detection, I presume that my eyes are first time going in one direction of the face. I don't know where is that, probably the eye area.
Yeah.
Then I will see the context.
Yeah.
I'm emotionally aroused somehow. Then I will look to search and find the same emotion that I felt in the second picture.
Yeah.
Have you analyzed this data?
Well, I did when at the time. Yes, I can't quite remember how I did the analysis, but I did a lot of. I mean, I think in the first shot, people. Well, we've got a fixation cross, so people in the middle of the screen to begin with. Then they'll typically jump to the eyes to begin with. They'll use the kind of nose as a kind of spatial anchor sometimes, sort of, and then they'll go to explore the mouth. They won't look at, and the background, the hair, the ears, they won't look at that at all. So it's the eyes followed by the mouth, and then I was comparing, sort of drew areas of interest around those, and then looked at fixation time in terms of milliseconds between the first face and the second face.
There were differences.
There were differences, yes, but only significant ones for the hunger condition. Yeah.
Because I think in this kind of experiment, the first reaction to the first phase can be used as a control of the reaction.
Right.
And the second question about neutrality.
Yeah.
I think it's very. We had a discussion about what is neutral phase, and I think there is no such a thing as a neutral phase.
Not really, no.
And maybe people tend to qualify a face as being sad, a bit sad when it's not smiling. So usually we are smiling to each other.
Yeah.
Usually we express our positive reactions in social environment. But the main idea is that if there is no such a thing as a neutral face, it is quite complicated to have the ground level for any experiment analyzing image, right?
Right.
So how you considered, because there were some differences between the faces themselves. For example, for women faces, they're quite different.
Right,
Some of them looking a bit.
Yeah, I mean,
sad.
what you realize is that people that there are some people just look a little bit more angry.
So what your differential data analysis? What was the differential? Where you have said this is 0.001 for my subject to evaluate the. How did you do that?
Sorry, what do you,
You have to have a reference point, right? A ground point, 0.
Yeah.
How have you established the neutrality status
Of the face.
subject?
of the participants or of
Of
the
the participants, yes. No, the subject being the participant, yes.
the neutrality? Well, we didn't. We did.
Have you set up a ground level 0 of the experiment? So you now, as the participant, have no emotion.
No, we didn't.
Yes.
No, I'm not. No, no. I mean,
Because when you evaluate an emotion, I think you have a tendency to create a compound between the emotion you see and your own
Yes,
emotional
yes.
states. And I think in such an experiment, you have to somehow erase the emotional status of the participant, you know, with some neutral content, or I don't know for the moment, but I think that was the question. If you set up this,
we didn't really control for the mood of the person at the beginning of the experiment. I have to say that we didn't do that. We kind of just randomly selected, and then we assumed that those kind of any emotional differences at the would be kind of averaged out across. But I mean, we followed what the other studies had done, and
no,
they did
the results.
yeah.
By the other studies you have results.
Yeah, so again, that's something that we could have. I mean, like we did ask quite a lot of questions to begin with about age, gender, and occupation, and all the rest of it. So, but no, we didn't specifically ask, what is your mood at today, or anything like that. So, I mean, yeah, that is probably something that should be added to any additional follow-up stuff. Not necessarily. Well, I mean, what we asked them to do was to label. I mean, we asked them, what is the mental state of the person that you're seeing, not is what your own mental state. But it could be the case that you do use your own mental state in order to make that. And we speculate that, or I speculate about that in the discussion of the paper as well. We're not exactly sure what the mechanism here is. But again, we tried to be faithful to the mythical version of the Kuleshov, where it was about evaluating the performance of the actor and what the character is meant to be thinking and feeling. So that's what we were trying to capture with the questions that we asked. So the list is the basic emotions. I mean, we could have added a load of secondary or complex emotions, but there are so many of them. I mean, the love, pride, all those, that's just a handful of them. And then we thought, okay, I mean, remember also they look at 24, each participant looked at 24 different clips, plus Rear Window at the very end. So the time and cognitive demands, and we thought, okay, we don't want people looking through a list and things. So yeah, it was again a pragmatic decision. Okay, we go with Ekman's classic primary basic emotions. Then we add hunger and desire, because we do have hunger and desire as a condition, and then we add other, and then maybe people will put more secondary complex emotions into that little box there. No. Sure, yeah. Yeah.
Because I know that we rather use negative emotion.
Right.
So I would wondering applying negative emotion if the interest is different. being more prone to
Uh,
you only use.
we only used neutral faces. Yeah. Again, it was pragmatic decision to try and get a replication of. If I was running it again, I would put in some fillers or morphs, where you've got a morph between maybe 75% neutral, 25% fifth. You know, you mix and match. But again, I didn't know how to do that. And 3/4 profile, if you morph a 3/4 profile neutral face with another, I wasn't sure it would work. So, but yeah, it's a good question. I mean, well, the paper was published in 2016. We did it in about 2014. The actual data was collected, and you know, and there were morphing softwares out there, but I think they were more effective for the head-on view straight into the camera, and we didn't want to use that. We wanted to use the 3/4 profile. But there have been kind of follow-up studies where they have, in the follow-up studies, they have been playing around with different mix a lot. Yeah. 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 Yes.
Consider that it might be ground zero. Or you might be able to use the node by the common ground and like between down.
Yeah. Again, we sort of, you know, we debated these things back and forth. The reason for the countdown was, thought if we just hold a blank screen on there for 3 seconds, people will get bored, which is also kind of negative. So we thought, okay, we'll have something that brings their eyes back to the center of the screen, and then we will just go 3, 2, and it'll be, yeah. So yeah, well, yeah, maybe, but we also did a baseline. Then we submitted the paper, and the reviewers asked us to do a baseline where we just tested the emotional stimuli without the context. And I actually can't remember what we found, but that passed. I mean, so they accepted our kind of baseline study of the. I'd have to look into what the reaction to this specific one was. Yeah. The face itself, a neutral face, the baseline is that it's a little bit sad. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but that might be the case, you know. I mean, you learn, you know, about these things, that people interpret stimuli in ways that you hadn't anticipated. So yeah. So yeah, so that's yeah. Yeah, sorry, we've gone way over now.